Hey guys, I'm Georgia and welcome back for another episode in my mystery series, where today we're going to be taking yet another look at a doe case. This is a case that I'd never actually heard of before until coming across it on a Reddit post, and after a quick search on YouTube it looks like the only other person who's covered this case is John lludden over at lludden Arts, so it's definitely one that needs more awareness and more coverage. This particular doe case is referred to under a number of different names. There's Dane County John Doe, Dane County Chimney Doe, and the Chimney Guy. And this is actually one I've gone back and forwards a lot on covering because the doe in question today has an ambiguous gender identity, and honestly I live in fear of saying the wrong thing and getting cancelled. Believe me, the last thing I ever want to do is offend anyone. But I do think it's a fear I need to get over because the most important thing here is sharing this story, getting the details out there, and hopefully eventually getting answers as to the identity and potential murderer of this person. So here is my disclaimer. I will be referring to the doe by male pronouns at points in this video in conjunction with what seems to be the biological sex. However, I am aware that there's a chance, although an unconfirmed chance, that the doe may have been a transgender woman. I did originally start writing this script with the neutral pronoun of they throughout, but it did get a bit confusing as to who I was referring to at certain points in the episode, so I do think it's important to be as clear as possible when talking about cases such as this one. So I might be referring to the doe as he at some point, just for the sake of clarity. You might not agree with my decision here and maybe you would have made a different one, that's fine, but I hope you understand my need to be clear and succinct in a video such as this one. If our doe's identity is discovered and it's found that they were indeed a transgender woman, then of course I will refer to them as such going forwards, but there's only limited evidence at this point to suggest that that was the case, and I feel like if this was somebody who did identify as male, then it's just as much a disservice to refer to them as her rather than him. We simply don't know what the situation was in this case. All good? Good. Right, let's go on with the episode. It was the 3rd of September 1989 in Madison, Dane County, Wisconsin, when the new owners of a music store called Good and Loud on University Avenue were doing some repair work. In the process, a boiler was removed from the base of a chimney, and after doing so, it was noticed that there was water leaking from the flue onto the basement floor. So the repair person, the owner, shone a light up the chimney to see what was going on. He quickly found a skull through the pipe connecting the boiler to the chimney, as well as rotting clothes at the base. One article in the Wisconsin State Journal states, at the bottom of the clay-lined chimney, a 20-inch pile of human bones and materials, including a skull, was found. As you would expect, the authorities were swiftly called, and it didn't take too long for them to discover that this was a complete human skeleton. Another article in the Wisconsin State Journal states that some fabric was pulled out of the chimney, and it's then that they were showered with old clothes and human bones, and that over time the body had decomposed and the bones had fallen to the bottom of the chimney. But I suppose the details don't really matter. The point is, there was a skeleton in this chimney. It was assumed at first that the body was that of a woman bearing feminine clothing and wearing an iron cross necklace. But during the forensic autopsy, it was determined that the body was that of a biological male. Although confusingly, there were a couple of articles in which police said they were only 93% positive of the biological sex, which is an oddly specific number. I couldn't find much more explanation as to this and why they weren't 100% sure. I find myself wondering if perhaps intersex could be coming into the picture here, and this caused confusion back in 1989 as it was less understood. But that is just pure speculation on my behalf. I'm not going to pretend I know exactly how testing for biological sex would be done back in 1989, so if anybody would be able to shed some light on that, then I'd love to hear from you in the comments. In all honesty, there's not really a plethora of information available to the public in this case. The doe's estimated age was 18 to 35 years old, white, 5'5" to 5'7", and the weight is unknown, although it is noted that they were slender with a thin build. The hair was brown and about 4 inches long, and the eye colour was also unknown. It's estimated the body had been in the chimney anywhere from 2 months to 2 years, and as a result the remains were just a skeleton, which obviously makes identification all that much harder. It is noted that they had a narrow nose and a strong jawline though. DNA is not available in this case, or at least it wasn't. We'll get into that more later, and neither are fingerprints, which does throw a spanner into the works. but the dentals are available and it's noted that they had a pronounced overbite. Due to the skeletal condition of the body, facial features are much more difficult to work out, but there are renderings made of what the doe might have looked like in life, crafted out of both clay and just pen on paper. It's worth noting that both of these will be a loose estimation of their features and are to be taken with a pinch of salt. So if somebody matching the description of this doe springs to mind but they don't look like the clay rendering or the drawings, don't let that stop you from coming forward with information. According to the Wisconsin State Journal, the remains are currently locked in a cabinet in the Dane County Medical Examiner's office, but still have not been DNA tested, which fills me with a range of questions, as I'm sure it does you too. I did see some sources suggesting that the remains had actually been cremated, but from the tone of this article it seems that not all of them were, if that was the case. Further biological testing here would quash any questions about the biological sex of this doe, as well as potentially lead to an identity if DNA is able to be extracted, and I'm at a loss as to why that hasn't been done. I was really happy to find that the incredible DNA Doe project do have a page for the Dane County Chimney Doe under their pending cases, and the status of it is undergoing testing. So it seems they might have been able to get their hands on the remains and are working their magic, but I'm not entirely sure what the case is here. So I guess you just need to watch this space. Processes such as this are slow though, and any other information could be vital to finding answers, and even if they do eventually get an answer as to our doe's identity, that might not lead to answers as to the death, so they still need people to come forwards. The feminine clothing the doe was found in here was a sleeveless paisley dress with a matching belt, a long-sleeved button-down shirt that may have been made with an Oxford type cloth, so that's like a heavy cotton cloth that's mainly used to make shirts, a medium-sized white Stag brand shaggy pile sweater, and low-heeled pointed shoes. The doe was wearing one pair of socks and was carrying another pair with them, and was also not wearing any underwear. In terms of jewellery, there was a German Iron Cross medallion and other personal items found, including a butter knife and a pocket comb. We don't have any more information about where these items were found, if they were found within the clothing or with the skeleton or what. And for obvious reasons, it was speculated early on that this doe was either a cross-dresser, a transgender woman, or a drag queen. But apart from the clothing, there's little else to go on here. There's little else to suggest that or back that up. The case was featured on national television and a facial reconstruction was created by Smithsonian experts. Police searched through missing persons files and tried to identify via dental records. Detectives stayed on the case for years, but there was never a single clue as to an identity. Lists of small-time, small-town burglars were compared, and car towing records and abandoned car records were also examined because the doe had to get to this area somehow, but nothing was found. But the big question in this case is, how did he end up down the chimney in the first place? Was it an accident, was it a homicide, or was it a failed attempt at burglary? It was clear from very early on that the doe hadn't been stuffed up the chimney from the bottom. It simply wasn't possible because the body was actually found in the pipe that was connected to the boiler, and the boiler blocked the bottom of the chimney. So they had to have fallen down the chimney to end up where they did. Authorities have stated that it's unlikely that anybody would voluntarily enter this chimney, but I think the theory that the intention here was burglary has to be explored. The chimney was clay-lined and had 3 exits, one being the top, in which there was a hole about 11.75 inches in diameter. Further down there was a connection, also 11.75 inches in diameter, that led to the boiler, and at the bottom there was a clean-out pipe, also 11.75 inches in diameter. The only way that you could actually get into the chimney though was through the hole at the top. It was simply impossible to get into the chimney from the building without removing the entire boiler. As I'm sure you're aware, 11.75 inches in diameter is a pretty small hole for any human to squeeze themselves through. For context, your standard football or soccer ball for you Americans is 8.66 inches in diameter, so we're talking slightly wider than football. Do you think you could make your body squeeze through a hole that big? As we've covered, our doe was a pretty small person, sort of between 5'5" and 5'7" in height, but we don't know what their weight or weight distribution was. Although it has been described as slender by the authorities, we can assume because they're thinking that the gap had to fit the doe through. All of this makes it questionable that any burglar would think that squeezing down this chimney would be a better option than any other form of breaking in. The doe wouldn't have known that there would be a boiler at the bottom of the chimney, and when they found themselves trapped, they simply would have had no way to get out. It would have been a slow and claustrophobic death. You'd almost hope they would end up asphyxiating quickly instead of just the alternative of starving to death. For someone to resort to this kind of break-in, you'd have to assume that they either didn't think their plan the whole way through, perhaps due to a low IQ or mental illness or maybe even drugs. But the doe was found with a butter knife that could also suggest break-in as the possible motive here, as butter knives can be used as makeshift screwdrivers in sticky situations. It could also double up as a weapon if needed. I've seen speculation that the female dress could have been a disguise, which does make sense with burglary, but it would make more sense to stick to the stereotypical all black and hoodie dress of your standard burglar rather than dress up as a woman. The theory doesn't quite add up, but I don't think it should be dismissed. The whole squeezing in through an 11.75 inch diameter though, that's going to be hard. Even the skinniest of burglars would struggle to fit through that. In the past, would-be burglars in this area have had to be rescued by firefighters after failing to break into businesses this way, so there definitely are people who attempt it. So maybe a smaller frame burglar did try it and they made it down the hole, and then found themselves trapped. Now, due to the condition of the skeleton, we don't know the cause of death in this case, but we do know something interesting in that the pelvic bone had been severely fractured, and according to Dane Network, those injuries appear to have been caused at the time of death. This could of course have been caused when they squeezed down the chimney, if that is indeed what happened, or potentially if they had been stuffed down the chimney by somebody else, potentially shortly after their death. But it generally takes a lot of force to break a pelvis. It's not an injury you hear about all that often. According to the Cedars-Sinai website, most pelvic fractures happen during high-speed accidents. We're talking car or motorbike accidents or falling from a great height. The Dane Network website states there's speculation that injuries could have been caused by the killer stomping on this part of the victim's body, but that would require great strength. I'm not saying it's impossible by any means, but this is a serious injury. It takes a lot of strength to break a pelvis. Which brings us to why a potential killer could have stomped on this particular area of our doe's body. And we come back round to the theory of this potentially being a transgender woman. It's noted in many places that Madison was a particularly friendly place for LGBTQ+ people even back in 1989. It's always been a progressive place, and I think it still is. LGBT people fled from across the country to Madison in their droves to find a safe space and a community. Of course though, Madison very much still had its issues with homophobia and transphobia, and sadly from my research it seems like a lot of that transphobia did come from within the community itself. Although a life may have been easier for a transgender woman in Madison at the time, I'm sure it wouldn't have been easy by any means. In the weeks after the discovery, it was speculated by police that this victim may have been involved in a romantic interlude with somebody who initially believed our doe to be a biological woman, and upon finding out otherwise, he may have exploded. Either this was a standard romantic interaction, perhaps somebody they met at a local bar or club, or this was the result of sex work. It could be that our doe was a sex worker who picked up a John on a street corner, who upon finding out their sex grew angry and beat them. I do have to question this though, because if the beating was bad enough to cause a broken pelvis, then it does seem odd that some of the more fragile bones weren't also broken. Ribs, fingers, maybe a wrist. I question if maybe this could have been a hit and run, but it was more of a hit, hide the body in a panic, and then run. Statistically, in hate crimes such as this, if it was a hate crime, the perpetrators don't usually go to great lengths to hide the body, but maybe this one was an anomaly. But then you find yourself with the question of how did the remains end up in the chimney? If you're on the street with somebody you have literally beaten to death in anger, why would a chimney be your first thought? You'd stay hidden and low, surely. You're going to attract a lot of attention dragging your body up to a roof. How would you even do that anyway? It could well be that the fairly flat rooftop of a currently empty store would be the perfect place to take a John if you were indeed a sex worker. Maybe the potential murderer didn't have to go far at all to dispose of the body. Before the music store had moved into this building, it had actually been a Christian bookstore, and there's a lot of speculation as to whether that might have been the reason why somebody was breaking in. Somebody struggling with their gender identity and religion, wanting some clarity on the matter. But again, I find that a bit far-fetched. I don't think you'd attempt to climb down a dangerous chimney just for that, but maybe I'm wrong. I actually did a bit of digging and discovered an article with the Capital Times from December 2010 stating that Good and Loud Music Store had opened their original location in Gorham Street in 1976 before moving to this location on University Avenue in 1989. From what I can gather, it was in the process of repairing the store whilst getting it ready to open that the body was found. Had the doe been trying to break in, he was likely trying to break into the bookstore rather than the music store. I mean, definitely not the music store, it didn't exist. I don't know how long the store had been vacant between the two, but we do know that our doe was there anywhere from 2 months to 2 years, which gives us a lot of time to wonder about. But moving on to a new theory, I saw a lot of speculation online that this could have been part of a hazing. Maybe somebody from the local university trying to join a fraternity or a society. I am sorry this episode consists of so much speculation, but there really is little solid fact to hold on to for this case. But by sharing different scenarios, there's a chance that we could spark a memory or an idea in somebody else. This theory was actually something I found mentioned a few times on web sleuths, and this is where the iron cross necklace found on the body might come into play. I can't take ownership of all this information at all. I came across all of this on web sleuths, but it seems that back in the 80s, the University of Wisconsin-Madison actually had something called the Iron Cross Society, the kind of old secret society you see in movies. Upon joining, the society gave members Iron Cross jewellery or Iron Cross pins. According to Wikipedia, the Iron Cross was a military decoration used in the Kingdom of Prussia and later in the German Empire and Nazi Germany. It's probably not something you'd want hanging around your neck today because of such connotations, and it would seem like an odd member for a potential member of the LGBTQ+ community to wear, but that's if they were aware of the past, which you wouldn't be able to guarantee. There's even a list, which I'll link down below, that lists past initiates of this Iron Cross Society by year, and I'd be very interested to know if any of these people mysteriously disappeared. I would like to assume that the authorities have looked into this, but if I'm being completely honest, I don't get the impression that too much time was spent on this case. I might be wrong, and I really hope I am, but there's such little information out there about this case, it seems online sleuths spent more time researching this than the authorities. If they did work under the assumption this was a transgender woman or a cross-dresser, it kind of makes sense this case might have been brushed under the carpet more than if somebody else was a victim. But I digress, we're exploring the potential hazing theory here. A hazing could very much fit with what we know about this case. A local university student trying to get into a fraternity or a society dared to dress up as a woman and break into a local business. I wonder if there was a university student who disappeared around this time, or if that was an avenue that was ever explored. There is a post on Web Sleuths by user Do You Love Me PFG from April 2019, in which they give a little bit more information about this theory, the kind of information that only somebody local to Madison and the university might know. They write that it wasn't unusual for people to drop out at the end of a semester and maybe even midterm, and the registrar's office just wouldn't notify anyone. They also write that Madison is a very LGBT friendly town, but it does have its issues within the community, and if our doe was a trans woman, they would have faced discrimination. They also write that the area in which doe was found was not a particularly student heavy area at the time of all this because of the bad public transport system, but there's also a chance this could have been a recent high school grad from the area. The question always remains though, how does nobody report a loved one missing? If they were a student or a recent high school grad, they would have had family, loved ones missing them, surely. Perhaps this is also something leaning in favour of this being a trans woman. Perhaps they escaped a bad family situation and went no contact. But even then, community is often important, and other trans people in the area likely would have noticed a friend missing. Then again, if that's the case, then we're relying on the authorities to take a missing persons report such as that one seriously, which sadly doesn't always happen. The feminine clothing on a male presenting body could also be explained as part of the bar crawl, as some think this outfit looks more costumey than serious. I saw some sources stating this was an area with quite a few bars, but when I looked this up on Google Maps, the area didn't look anything as I sort of imagined it would. I thought it would perhaps be more of an intimate street with stores and bars lining the road, but it's actually much sparser. If you're watching on YouTube, then you should be able to see a screenshot of Google Maps right now showing the area. If you're on my podcast, then I'll do my best to explain what we're seeing. We're talking a fairly busy road, 5 or 6 lanes wide. Opposite, there's a residential street, and what would have been Good and Loud is sandwiched by a car repair shop and a Perkins restaurant. Since all of this, it does seem that the building that previously stood there has been renovated beyond recognition, but if you change Street View back to 2007, you can see that Good and Loud was a 1-storey building with a relatively flat roof. Not completely flat, but not like super pointed. I don't really see any way from the front that you'll be able to climb up there, but there might be an access around the back that we can't see. Even as you travel further down the road, I can't seem to see any bars or drinking spots, but of course the furthest back the Street View goes is 2007, so I can't really speak for the late 1980s. Would this have even been the kind of place that sex workers took or picked up clients? I honestly just don't know. It could just be people getting too drunk and daring their friends. Maybe they were drinking at the restaurant next door. But I'm left with a question of why, if this was the case, nobody called for help. Maybe people were scared of getting into trouble and so just left their friend in the chimney to die. It doesn't seem like something I would personally do, but there are people out there who would make that wrong decision in the moment, in the panic. Maybe there's somebody walking around out there carrying this big secret. I mean, there's definitely somebody walking around out there carrying this secret. Chances are that somebody knows what happened or even responsible for putting the dough down the chimney. In 2012, a woman called Laura Zimmerman came forward saying that she believes a man she worked with in the legislature more than 22 years ago might have been the dough. Legislature? I feel like I said that wrong. This tip was passed along to the Madison Police Department before being assigned to a police detective in 2012, and Laura said that she saw a facial reconstruction in 1990 of the dough and recognised it as a former page who may have worked at the Capitol with her, one of many young people who would fetch sandwiches and fill water pitchers. She said she mentioned it to her boss at the time, but mainly just kept it to herself as she couldn't remember the young man's name. She was sure that he'd worked there between 1980 and 1985. In 2012, she decided to bring it to the State Journal's attention, saying that she thought if the police ran the social security numbers of people working for the Senate Sergeant's office prior to the body being found, and found that one of those people had just disappeared, that might be him. It was confirmed at the time that this would likely be the way that investigators approached this particular tip, but as I mentioned, this was back in 2012 and there's been no identification since, so we can either assume that it was unsuccessful or there were no matches. And that's about all we have for this case. I don't really have any more information to share with you. The jurisdiction of this case falls under the City of Madison Police Department, for which I'll leave contact information down below, just in case anyone has anything they feel could be of use. As always, if you live in this area or know people who do, feel free to share this video or the story with the people around you. Even the smallest tip could be a huge help. I don't know how actively the police are working this case today, but I'm sure any tips would be gratefully received. Thank you so much for tuning in this week, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.